I had been watching the hearing unfold for over 2 hours when something in Pam Bondi's tone shifted. She stood calmly at the witness table, arms folded neatly in front of her, as Judge James Boasberg peered down at her from the bench, his expression, as always, unreadable. Most of the room assumed this was just another procedural hearing in a long and dry series of judiciary oversight meetings. The air was thick with routine, boredom, and legal jargon. But Bondi wasn't there for routine. "I'll be brief," she said coolly, flipping a single folder onto the table with a heavy thud that echoed through the courtroom. "I've come across documents that suggest a private arrangement, one that Judge Boasberg failed to disclose to this committee or the public." There was a visible reaction from the press bench. Several reporters sat upright. A few court officials exchanged nervous glances. Judge Boasberg raised a brow, his voice firm. "Miss Bondi, if this is an attempt to politicize these proceedings," she cut him off. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I think what you've done politicizes it more than anything I could say." A hush fell over the room. Bondi slowly opened the folder. "Exhibit A," she said, holding up a printed email with the Department of Commerce header. Internal correspondence showing that Judge Boasberg had direct communication with lobbyists tied to the Apex Energy litigation, weeks before his supposed recusal. Gasps. Audible gasps. Even Boasberg blinked twice. And just like that, the courtroom that had been filled with rustling papers and the low hum of typing, fell completely silent. Judge Boasberg leaned forward slightly, his knuckles widening as he gripped the edge of his bench. His voice, once smooth and commanding, now held a tight edge. "Miss Bondi, that's a serious accusation. I trust you have more than speculative material." Pam didn't flinch. "Absolutely," she replied, sliding the next page into view. Exhibit B. A wire transfer dated 2 days after that email, $75,000 to a private foundation linked directly to Boasberg's brother-in-law. Same foundation that funded Apex's legal media campaign. The murmurs turned into a low rumble of disbelief across the room. "Let the record show," Bondi continued, her voice gaining strength, "this payment occurred within 48 hours of Apex's motion being fast-tracked under sealed deliberation. No explanation. No disclosure. Just, approval." Judge Boasberg's gavel struck once, hard. Bang. "This is outrageous. You're attempting to discredit the judiciary with unverified conjecture and selective leaks." Pam slowly turned to face him directly. "Then let's bring in the parties listed in these communications. I've subpoenaed 3 of them. 2 are here, waiting outside." The courtroom doors creaked slightly as a pair of suited figures stepped into view behind the glass windows. Someone in the gallery whispered, "That's Eric Dalton, he was on the Commerce Ethics Board." Boasberg's face lost color. Pam tilted her head just slightly, her tone now like ice. "I suggest we let them speak. Unless, of course, there's something you prefer to confess first." And still, no one in the courtroom said a word. The judge didn't respond immediately. His lips pressed into a tight line, and for a brief moment, his eyes darted to the side exit, as if he was considering something that had nothing to do with judicial procedure. Then, the doors opened. 2 men stepped into the room, both in dark suits, both visibly tense. One was Eric Dalton, formerly praised for his time on the Commerce Ethics Board, now avoiding eye contact with everyone. The other, Mark Ellison, was Apex Energy's former legal advisor. Their presence turned the already frozen courtroom into something close to paralysis. Pam nodded toward the bailiff. "Swear them in." Boasberg's voice was low, but urgent. "This is highly irregular, not if the Judiciary Oversight Subcommittee authorizes it," Bondi said, turning toward Chairman Rollins, seated a few chairs down. "And as of this morning, Mr. Chairman, I believe you signed that emergency provision." Chairman Rollins gave a single nod. "Proceed." Dalton took the stand first. He was sweating. Badly. He looked like a man who hadn't expected to be summoned, at least not today. Pam didn't give him time to settle. "Mr. Dalton, did Judge Boasberg personally contact you regarding Apex Energy's regulatory waiver prior to his recusal from the federal case?" Dalton swallowed. "Yes." Gasps again, louder this time. Pam pressed forward. "And did he suggest any, quote, ways to make it look clean while ensuring Apex's deal moved forward?" Dalton hesitated. "He did." The crowd erupted. Reporters began typing furiously. Someone in the back whispered, "He's finished." Judge Boasberg's gavel slammed again, but it no longer silenced the room. The authority behind it had cracked. Pam turned slowly, facing the bench with calm precision. "Your Honor, I request you step down from this case effective immediately and submit yourself for formal ethics investigation." For the first time, Judge Boasberg didn't answer. He just stared at her. For a long, breathless moment, the courtroom remained still. Judge Boasberg sat motionless, jaw clenched, eyes locked on Bondi with a mix of disbelief and growing fear. Pam turned to the second witness. "Mr. Ellison, please confirm, were you present during the conference call where Judge Boasberg discussed strategies to protect Apex's interests under sealed litigation?" Mark Ellison adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes. I was on that call." "And did he mention any specific journalists or outlets that could be guided in their coverage of the ruling?" Ellison looked down. "He mentioned two, and offered to have his staff deliver an outline to shape the narrative." The room was no longer just shocked, it was spiraling into disbelief. One of the court clerks actually stood up and walked out, visibly shaken. Boasberg's voice finally returned, but it was trembling. "You don't know what you're doing, Ms. Bondi. There are bigger implications here than you understand." Pam narrowed her eyes. "Oh, I understand perfectly. And so does the public now." The chairman slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. We're suspending Judge Boasberg from these proceedings pending a full investigation. Marshal, please escort him out." The U.S. Marshal stepped forward without hesitation. Boasberg stood slowly. His robe swayed slightly as he turned toward Bondi. "You've just opened a door you'll regret," he said, voice low and bitter. Pam didn't flinch. "I'd rather open that door than let this court be used as a playground for backroom deals." The marshal took his arm. The courtroom was absolutely silent as Judge Boasberg, once untouchable, was walked out, robe and all. Pam stepped back, collected her folder, and whispered just loud enough for the reporters to catch, "This was only phase one." As the doors closed behind Judge Boasberg, the air in the courtroom didn't relax, it tightened. Whispers turned into hurried conversations. Reporters raced to submit early headlines. Staffers darted out into the hallway, phones already pressed to their ears. But Pam Bondi remained still, centered, and composed. Chairman Rollins leaned forward. "Ms. Bondi, this is unprecedented. I need to know, how long have you had this evidence?" Pam slid the folder closed and looked him straight in the eye. 2 months. I waited until I had first-hand witness cooperation and chain of custody confirmations. I wasn't going to walk in here with a theory, I came with proof." Rollins nodded slowly, clearly rattled. "You do realize the ripple effects of this? Every ruling tied to Boasberg over the last 18 months is now in question." "I know," Pam replied. "And I also know this isn't just about one judge. There's more. A network. Lobbyists, judicial clerks, corporate intermediaries. I have their names." Someone in the gallery actually gasped. Ellison, still on the witness stand, interrupted nervously. "She's right. I saw more than just this. There were emails between judicial staffers and a consulting firm used by 3 other energy companies. It was coordinated." Pam turned to the chairman. "Then we reconvene. Subpoenas. Full hearings. We do this in daylight." Chairman Rollins hesitated only a second. Then he nodded. I'll authorize a full inquiry. And Ms. Bondi, you're leading it." The entire courtroom erupted. Not in applause, this wasn't a moment for celebration. It was tension, pressure, the feeling that something enormous had just cracked open and the consequences were only beginning to show. Pam gathered her notes. And as she stepped out of the chamber, flanked by journalists and aides, one thing was clear: this wasn't the end of the scandal. It was just the beginning. 3 days later, the headlines were everywhere: federal judge suspended after Bondi bombshell, Apex Energy scandal widens, whistleblowers step forward following Boasberg exposure, Pam Bondi tapped to lead judiciary ethics inquiry. Washington was in panic mode. Inside a secure federal conference room, Pam Bondi sat before a new panel, this time, one stacked with federal investigators, legal analysts, and members of Congress from both parties. No cameras. No press. Not yet. She opened a fresh folder, thinner than before, but heavier in weight. There's a list of internal communications between Apex Energy, Judge Boasberg's law clerk, and 2 policy consultants with direct ties to 3 sitting judges in the D.C. Circuit, she said. One senator leaned forward. "Are you suggesting this scandal goes beyond Boasberg?" Pam nodded. "I'm not suggesting. I'm stating." A long pause followed. The chairman of the investigative subcommittee, Senator Green, finally asked, "How many judges are compromised?" "At least 4. Possibly more. I have documentation tying Apex Energy's public relations firm to contributions made through layered shell entities, each strategically timed around key rulings." "And how deep into the DOJ?" Pam looked up. "Deep enough that I don't trust submitting this through ordinary channels anymore." Silence again. Someone finally muttered, "Jesus." Senator Green cleared his throat. "You'll have full discretion, Ms. Bondi. Build your team. Start interviewing. But understand, if you're right, this could trigger one of the biggest legal purges in modern American history." Pam closed the folder. "Then let's get started." By the following week, Pam's temporary office had been moved to a secure wing inside the Judiciary Oversight Building, reinforced walls, soundproof doors, no windows. She wasn't just uncovering corruption now. She was protecting herself from it. Her team was small but deadly focused: 2 former federal prosecutors, a cybersecurity analyst on loan from DHS, and a former Senate staffer who once ran background checks for the Intelligence Committee. Each one was handpicked. Each one knew they were treading on dangerous ground. But not everyone wanted the truth exposed. That became obvious the moment her lead investigator, Marcus Hale, pushed a manila envelope across the table. "You need to see this," he said. Pam opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy but clear enough to recognize. One showed a man in a gray coat hovering outside her apartment entrance at 3:14 a.m. Another showed the same man 2 nights later, near her building's garage entrance. No license plate. No ID tags. "Who is he?" Pam asked. Marcus frowned. Facial recognition bounced him against 2 federal databases. Nothing came up, which usually means one of 2 things: he's clean, or he's too clean. Pam's jaw clenched. "Send it to DHS with an encrypted trace request. I want a name." But that wasn't all. The cybersecurity analyst, Rima, had picked up irregular logins to the federal case file archive. Someone was trying to access sealed documents from Apex Energy's court history. The logins were masked as internal DOJ traffic, except they didn't follow DOJ's digital signature pattern. Someone was ghosting federal credentials. Pam stood up, heart rate steady, mind racing. "They're not just covering up," she said quietly. "They're scrambling." Marcus leaned forward. "You think they know what we found?" "No," Pam answered. "But they know I'm close." Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from an encrypted line: "Stop digging or the next folder will be about you." Pam stared at the screen for a long moment. Then locked it, looked at her team, and said, "Good. That means we hit a nerve." Pam didn't flinch. Threats were nothing new, but this wasn't political theater anymore. This was war. A cold, quiet war fought in backrooms, firewalled servers, and hallways lined with smiling enemies. The next morning, Rima cracked the login trail. She stood over Pam's desk, tablet in hand. The login attempts came from a masked node pinging through 3 different agencies. But the origin source traces back to a private satellite node registered to an offshore firm based in Cyprus. Pam raised a brow. Energy ties. Rima nodded. And lobbying. That firm is a silent partner in a consulting group that once paid for Judge Boasberg's travel to a legal summit in Monaco, the same month Apex's pre-ruling draft was circulating. Pam exhaled. So, it wasn't just about one deal. It's an entire system. She turned to a wall where a chart had started to form, lines, photos, names. Dotted connections tied together judges, consultants, lobbyists, and corporations. And right in the center, outlined in red ink, was Apex Energy. But there was a new name on the chart now. A man named Dorian Vance. Rima pointed to it. "He's the one outside your building." Marcus added, "Ex-intelligence. Disappeared 5 years ago after a Senate probe collapsed. No official title now. But every whisper says he's the one who cleans up legal messes for clients too powerful to be named." Pam circled the name slowly. "That's who they sent." Marcus nodded. "That's who they send when someone's getting too close." Pam turned to the team. "Then let's make it official. Call the chairman. I want a public hearing scheduled within 72 hours. Subpoena everyone tied to this satellite firm, Vance included." Marcus hesitated. "Going public now will force their hand. They won't play quiet after this." Pam's stare didn't waver. "Good. Let them come out of the shadows. I want the entire country to see what they're protecting." 71 hours later, the hearing chamber was standing room only. Cameras were everywhere. Every major network was live streaming. The hashtag Boasberggate had trended globally within minutes of the subpoenas going public. The air was thick with anticipation and dread, as if Washington itself was holding its breath. Pam Bondi entered the room wearing a navy blazer, her team close behind her. She looked calm, but every step she took carried the weight of what was about to unfold. Senator Green opened the session. "Today's hearing is not about political theater. It's about integrity, or the loss of it, at the highest levels of our judiciary. Ms. Bondi, the floor is yours." Pam stood and approached the microphone. "What you're about to see," she said, "is the beginning of a systemic unraveling. One that doesn't start with a single bad actor, but with a network designed to keep power above consequence." She tapped the remote, and the screen behind her lit up with a timeline. Names. Emails. Bank transfers. Travel logs. The room grew still again as Apex Energy's connections to private judicial summits, lobbying payments, and sealed case interference were laid out for all to see. "And this," Pam said, clicking again, "is Dorian Vance." A photo appeared. Grainy, but unmistakable. Surveillance stills of him near her residence. Another of him boarding a private jet listed under a shell firm linked to the same Cyprus satellite company. Senator Green leaned forward. "He was spotted outside your apartment." Pam didn't blink. "Twice. And once outside the oversight building's underground parking garage. My team traced him to a former intelligence contractor with a history of legal manipulation on behalf of foreign and domestic clients." Then came the final blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, I now submit a sealed file, containing recorded audio provided by a whistleblower within Apex Energy. In this file, you will hear senior Apex executives discussing specific judges, including Boasberg, by name. You'll also hear them refer to the cleaner, Mr. Vance, by code. Gasps. Again. Senator Green looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Pam finished with the quiet force of someone who had earned every second of the spotlight. We have a choice today. We can pretend this is isolated, or we can finally say what everyone's been too afraid to admit, that our legal system has cracks. And someone has been profiting from what slips through them. Silence. But not the kind that lasts long. Because outside the chamber, more names were leaking. And inside, subpoenas were already being drafted. The moment the hearing adjourned, the fallout hit like a tidal wave. Within hours, federal agents executed search warrants at Apex Energy's D.C. satellite office and 2 private law firms identified in Pam's investigation. By evening, news outlets reported that Judge Boasberg had temporarily withdrawn from all judicial duties, though the judiciary had quietly reassigned his caseload before the headline even broke. But the real shock came at 2:14 a.m. Pam's secure line buzzed, waking her from a light sleep inside the oversight building's protected quarters. It was Marcus. "Turn on Channel 5, he said. "Now." She did. There, on live broadcast, stood Attorney General Rachel Stein at a podium, flanked by U.S. Marshals. In light of new evidence brought forward by independent counsel Pam Bondi, Stein said, the Department of Justice is formally opening a criminal investigation into judicial corruption involving federal contracts, case manipulation, and obstruction of justice. Multiple sitting judges, private contractors, and corporate executives are now under active scrutiny. Pam stared at the screen. It was happening. But there was one more moment that would define the shift. At 8:22 a.m. the next morning, as Bondi entered the oversight building for her debriefing, she was handed a sealed envelope, no return address, no markings. Inside, a single photo. It showed her standing in the hearing chamber, the moment she revealed Dorian Vance's identity. The photo had been taken from an upper balcony, a section cleared for security. On the back, one sentence was written in clean, red ink, "This is far from over." Pam folded the photo and slid it into her file. Without flinching, she looked at Marcus and said, "Then neither are we." 3 weeks later, D.C. was barely recognizable. 3 federal judges had quietly resigned. Apex Energy's stock had plummeted 42%. 12 high-ranking officials were indicted, including 2 former DOJ ethics liaisons. A full federal task force had been assembled under emergency order. And the public? They were watching everything, for once, with wide-open eyes. But Pam Bondi wasn't done. She stood once more before the Judiciary Oversight Committee, now serving as special counsel with direct authority from the Attorney General. The room was no longer filled with skeptics. They listened differently now, with a respect forged not by politics, but by consequence. "This isn't just about exposure," Pam said. "It's about prevention. We need permanent oversight protocols. Real-time auditing of judicial communications in corporate litigation-sensitive cases. And above all, transparency." She paused, scanning the room. Because if it happened once, it can happen again. And next time, there may not be a Bondi in the room. The committee applauded, not the performative kind, but the kind that meant something. Even Senator Green, now her staunchest ally, stood and shook her hand. Later that afternoon, she returned to her office. On her desk was a new folder, marked confidential. Inside were reports of similar anomalies in 3 other districts. Same tactics. Same patterns. Different names. Pam sat down. Smiled slightly. And said aloud, "Round 2. Outside, the sun dipped behind the Capitol dome, but inside the oversight building, the light stayed on.